All right. Hello and welcome back to the show. It's the 101 Fantasy Football Show on YouTube. My name is Sawyer and I am your host, and I'm excited to be back today. Excited to talk football. We're getting close to the fantasy football season, the NFL season. It's getting exciting. I'm sure you have a lot of drafts out there. I know I've got tons of drafts coming up this week and next week, and I'm really getting revved up for this. Um, I do want to say sorry for the delay on this video. I was moving, so you might notice I'm in a different location now. I'm actually out on the east coast of Canada now, out at university for the year. So from now on, this is going to probably be the setup for the videos. So yeah, just wanted to say that. So without further ado, let's jump into today's video. We are talking about the NFC North. So if you haven't checked out my videos before, I've done a divisional breakdown for all of the AFC divisions. Today we're going to start off with the NFC. I'm going to try to crank these out over the next week to get them to you, hopefully before too many of your drafts happen. And then I might even throw in one or two videos before the season starts on just some of my biggest buys of the year, some of the guys that I'm selling on the year, some little tidbits like that, some little fun episodes before week one. But with that said, let's just jump right into the video. So divisional breakdowns. We're going to be going through the Detroit Lions today, the Green Bay Packers, the Chicago Bears, and the Minnesota Vikings, and we'll do it one by one. So here we've got the overall rankings board, which if you've seen one of these videos, you know, just kind of, I've highlighted all the players that we're talking about today. You can see kind of where they are in my rankings for this season in terms of at least just what their projections are. I'll talk individually about each one probably. So let's go to that. So first team we're going to talk about is the Chicago Bears. Chicago Bears are not a team that's really all that sexy in 2020, real NFL football or fantasy football. They're a team that, generally speaking, has a stronger defense than they have an offense. And they got a lot of question marks. And that starts off at the quarterback position. Last year, this team was not very good. That was thanks to their quarterback, Mitch Trubisky, really not playing well. And so this season, they bring in Nick Foles in the offseason. They say he was supposed to be the backup. That was kind of the coach speak. Oh, yes, he's just the backup to Mitch Trubisky. We want to see what we have in Trubisky, but we want to challenge him and push him. Reports at the start of the season were that, or not the start of the season, but the start of training camp was, you know, Trubisky was doing really well in the online video sessions they were having, the team meetings over Zoom. But now, since camp has gone on, it sounds like Nick Foles is slightly edging him out. And so what I've taken that to be for 2020 fantasy football is that, you know what, no matter who wins the starting job, I don't think they're going to hold it. If it's Mitch Trubisky, I think, you know, he's probably not going to perform well enough to maintain the job. And then it's going to become Nick Foles and vice versa. If it's Nick Foles, I don't know if he'll do well enough to maintain the job. And Trubisky will come in at some point. And, you know, with Matt Nagy right now, it's kind of like a win now year for him. He's got to get it done. And if he doesn't get it done, he could be seeing the streets next year, getting tossed out of Chicago and having to go find somewhere else to coach. So I see him probably flip-flopping. And so as a result, I've got these guys statted out just going 50-50 because I think this is a really tough situation to predict. And for fantasy football this year, I would just be avoiding both guys. Maybe there will be a streamable week where one you know is starting and they're playing a really nice matchup. But otherwise, I would just be a straight-up avoid on both of these guys. At the running back position, there's some new question marks going on because I think generally the fantasy community was somewhat in on David Montgomery this offseason as a potential bounce back candidate because, well, not bounce back, but a breakout candidate, I guess, because in his rookie season, he wasn't great, but neither was the team. This offseason, he had done a lot of work. He was talking about how he felt a lot better. He'd taken better care of his body over the offseason, started watching what he was eating so he could perform better on the field. And then if you were paying attention just this last end of the week, he strained his groin in practice. It was like if there was a video floating around, if you saw it, it didn't look great. He went down, lots of pain, but the reports initially were that he was carted off. That is not true. He actually got up under his own power, walked off the field, and then they took a cart, or they tossed him in the cart to drive him back to the team facilities because where they practice is actually a decent distance away from the facility. So no matter who it is, any injury, they would normally get carted off. So, or not carted off, but carted to the team facility from the practice field. So that was the first sign of like, okay, let's take a breath out here. Okay, we're not holding our breath. He's not going to be out for the season. However, then we were waiting for a report, and a groin strain is really not I think a lot of people were like, oh, it's just a groin strain, but that's not a great injury to have as a running back at the start of the season. So they gave the timeline of 2 to 4 weeks. I've done a little bit of research. I'm not an expert as a medical doctor or anything, but a groin strain, 2 to 4 weeks is slightly optimistic. Generally speaking, to the level he had, which I believe was called grade 2 or grade 3 or something like that, the realistic timeline is more like 4 to 6 weeks. And so, that 2 to 4 weeks, I really hope he's not coming back in 2 weeks because apparently these types of injuries, just based on the location that they are, they're kind of on the interior of your thigh, right up and attaching into your private area. And so basically these injuries are very high to re-injure, high risk to re-injure because of their location, as well as they're extremely painful to play through. And so because of that, I have him statted for 14 games because I hope I hope he just waits till he's ready to go. And so that would be generally, sitting out 2 weeks because we're 2 weeks of the season, then 2 more weeks. That would be about 4. Then he could come back for week 3 and on and hopefully be good. And this is kind of my new updated stats for him if he was to play 14 weeks, which would be a very solid running back beyond those first 2 weeks. However, if he does come back before that, I would actually be steering a bit clear because then you have the risk of re-injury. Then you have the risk of just like the whole year it ends up becoming a nagging injury. And generally speaking, when these things happen, look at Odell Beckham last year, same type of injury, and it just kind of hurt his fantasy production the entire year. And so I'm a bit hesitant on Montgomery for redraft. However, that's what I'd be watching for, hoping he gets that extra little bit of time to sit out before he comes back. In his stead, Tariq Cohen. Tariq Cohen is an okay back. He's totally a scat back. He's 5'6" and like 187 or something like that. Like he's never going to be able to run through the tackles very well. So even with Montgomery out, I don't think a lot of carries go to Cohen. He'll get his share of targets. He had 104 last year. This year, I think he'll still be up near that 100 mark. Hopefully he becomes more efficient. 2 years ago, he was a fantasy running back too. So this past season, he had 104 targets, and he just was really inefficient with them, 5.77 yards per reception. A lot of that was because he was just running out of bounds. He didn't want to take contact, so that is scary for me to see. Yes, maybe it means he plays more games, but I want him to be willing to try to make a move and get upfield. This is football that you're playing. This isn't just running out of bounds. And so we'll see. We'll see what he does. I think he's a decent pickup as a guy who he's a good bounce back candidate slightly in half or especially full PPR, especially if Montgomery is out. But he's not a guy I'm eagerly going out to try to buy. The other running backs, so if you're in a super deep league or if you're a Montgomery owner and you want to just stack it just to make sure you have someone, it sounds like right now I haven't heard anything about them signing anyone new or talking to anyone or bringing anyone in for a tryout. So that could be like Devonta Freeman or maybe going to try to trade for Royce Freeman. But right now, the other two guys on the team are Artavis Pierce and Ryan Nall. Both guys were undrafted free agent guys. Nall was with the team last year. Pierce, I believe, was new this season. Pierce is a 5'11", 208 back. They're talking about him being the most traditional of the running back groups. But Ryan Nall, 6'2", 234. This guy's a big boy. And so if they're looking for maybe goal line carries, that could go Nall's way. So those are the two options you have. If it's a super deep league and you're maybe a dynasty league and you want to scoop up your backup to David Montgomery, I would probably, take a shot on either one you like. I couldn't tell you which one it's going to be because both of these guys have just so limited NFL experience, and neither guy was amazing from the tape that I saw from them in college. And so I don't think either one is an urgent pickup. At the wide receiver position, there's not a ton to say here because I think the team's going to be fairly bad again on offense. But Allen Robinson is a beast. He's an elite wide receiver in terms of his talent, his route running ability. He's developed into this awesome leader and player on the field who's a role model on the field. He's just a true professional player. And so I like Allen Robinson. I believe in the talent. Whoever's at quarterback, they're going to make sure they get him the ball. So I have him targeted or started out for similar targets to last year. He had an insane number of targets. 154 is a top 5 mark in the league. And so another 146 is a ton of targets. He's the type of guy who I think is going to be really, really solid in a PPR league. He won't be as solid in a standard league because his receiving yards will generally be lower in terms of yards per reception, as well as his touchdowns won't be super, super high because they're just not going to score a lot. But for PPR leagues, you'll see later, like he's very fairly priced as a wide receiver 1 for fantasy football. Anthony Miller, talented player, but he's got a lot of injury history. In his 2 years so far, he hasn't been great. He really showed some flashes at the end of last year. And so going into this year, I was excited about Miller. But the more that I've gone through this, it's just that this team last year, they didn't really support a very good second option. So Taylor Gabriel's gone, but Ted Ginn comes in. Riley Ridley is a guy that they're talking up in camp and saying they want to get him the ball more. Cordero Patterson, I actually should have mentioned it with the running backs. He'll probably get some run at the running back position. He might be the guy to own behind David Montgomery, just for the touches in the backfield if Montgomery's out. But Ridley, he's getting talked up. They like what he's done. He was a draft selection last year, I believe, in the 4th round. And so I don't think there's going to be a crazy number of targets going Miller's way. I don't think he's going to see over 100 targets. He's a decent guy to pick up at the very end of your draft. You could probably get him in a redraft league in your last 1 or 2 rounds. And he's a guy I'm willing to take the shot on because I like him as a talent. He's a very talented route runner. But Allen Robinson is going to see his share. And beyond that, I think Tariq Cohen and Anthony Miller are kind of fighting for. Like Tariq Cohen might see a little bit of what that Taylor Gabriel was last year. Taylor Gabriel role was in his target share. And so Miller, I don't know if he'll really jump up in targets this season. So a decent target at the end of your draft, but not someone I'm eagerly going out to find. And then the tight end position, just more just kind of crud. I probably wouldn't draft either of these guys for redraft. And that's about all you need to know in the redraft side of it. Jimmy Graham, maybe he's streamable in a week, but I think you could probably leave him on the wire at the start of your redraft leagues. So how does this look in terms of rankings? Quarterbacks have them pretty similar to what the consensus has them. Pretty comfortable with that. They're neither guy I'm drafting really. David Montgomery, I'm right around ECR, and that's with the injury that I've statted in. I'm not sure if ECR has that adjusted yet, so he may end up becoming a value if ADP and ECR end up dropping him around running back 30. Then I do think he's a value there because I'm hoping, as long as he sits out those first 2 weeks, he'll still be very good for you as a running back 2 from weeks 3 through 17. However, monitor the injury situation. He is a bit of a risky pickup because, we talk about that injury discount sometimes. Sometimes it's not worth it to pick up an injury discount because, well, you're buying an injury. And if the injury doesn't heal properly, which sometimes that just happens in football, then you're going to get limited production from that player. Tariq Cohen, a bit more off of him in half and standard, but generally pretty similarly priced to DCR, pretty equal in terms of PPR. At the receiver position, the only really thing of note is that, like I said, Allen Robinson is going to be a stud for PPR. However, going as the 10 in standard is probably a bit too rich for my blood. He's not going to score a ton of touchdowns. He's not going to get a crazy number of yards because his yards per reception isn't high, and neither of these quarterbacks are really going to air it out to him. And so although his quarterbacks previously have been Christian Hackenberg in college and then Bortles and Trubisky in the NFL, maybe Nick Foles is the best quarterback he's ever had. I still just don't think Foles is elite. So I'm excited to see what happens in the future for A-Rob, but for standard this year, he's a little bit too high up, in my opinion. Like I said, Miller and Ginn you won't draft. Miller, he's pretty fairly priced, and I'd probably avoid Graham. So how does this look for Dynasty? At the quarterback position, there's no one really to own, and unfortunately, because we don't really know who the quarterback's going to be, it's hard to buy into this offense long term. What I can say is, David Montgomery, they seem really bought into him as a player. If he has a good season this season, or if he can produce, I do think he remains the starter for the next couple seasons. Tariq Cohen's a free agent. I'm not sure. I would assume right now he's going to try to go somewhere else, but I really don't know what type of role. He's a guy who's going to need a really niche receiving role in an offense to be fantasy relevant, and so it's going to depend on really what offensive coordinator gets him and how they're going to use him. So creative offensive coordinator, big thumbs up. If it's someone who's not so creative with how they utilize their players, Tariq Cohen as a gadget type of player might suffer in fantasy. At the receiver position, not a ton to talk about, there's a little bit, and that's A-Rob. So A-Rob is a free agent this year, and like I said, his best quarterbacks have been Hackenberg, Bortles, Trubisky, and now he's got Foles. And so there's a realistic chance he walks at the end of the season. I know he wants to come back to Chicago, but there haven't been contract talks really at this point, and so it's looking like he might become a free agent. And if A-Rob has a talent and as a professional player, he is an elite talented wide receiver. I do believe he is in the argument for a top 10 talent in the NFL. And so if he goes to another team that has a decent quarterback that can sling the ball to him, this could be a really, really good dynasty buy. And so if you're in a half-point PPR league or a standard PPR league, he's a guy I'm actually actively seeking because I think if you buy him now, he'll get solid production this season. But I think there will be a lot of hype for him next year if he ends up signing with a team where, almost any situation, he'll get a better quarterback. There's not many teams who have a weaker quarterback situation than the Bears. And so that could be a really exciting thing that either, you hold on because you're really excited about what the possibilities are, or you end up trading him because his value spikes because people are saying, oh, look, he's paired up with quarterback X who, he's a lot more solid and competent as a quarterback than what he's had in his past. And with that in mind, Anthony Miller also becomes an interesting dynasty buy because if A-Rob is gone, and that opens up the target share, they'll probably try to replace A-Rob. However, I don't know who's going to replace him, and I doubt whoever it is going to immediately see 150 targets. And so Anthony Miller has to take a step forward in the offense, which makes him an interesting piece to be holding in the long term because he does have a contract heading into 2021 as well. At the tight end position, Graham, not really a guy I think you need to be owning. But Cole Kmet, a prospect I like. He's going to take his time. You can see Jimmy Graham here. They've got a lot of money tied up in him. Now, the potential out after this year is $3 million. If he doesn't perform, there's a chance Kmet gets a real shot next season. But I think he's generally like other tight ends. You're going to be waiting till his third year for him to really break out. So be patient. If Kmet's a guy you like, try to throw him on your taxi squad if you can. But otherwise, just keep that in mind that his value will only be lower this year or decrease this year, and you're just going to have to be patient with him. All right, the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions are actually a team that I'm kind of interested in, which is weird because they're generally a team that doesn't produce a ton of fantasy football assets, but I think this season there's actually some intrigue. So first off, I wanted to point out Matthew Stafford. So from 2011 to 2017, Matthew Stafford was a quarterback 1 for fantasy in 6 of those 7 years. He was a guy that we were consistently seeing as a guy who you could be rolling out as your every week quarterback, every week starter for your fantasy team, and he was going to give you good production. And the one year he didn't was 2014, where he was the quarterback 15, which even still not terrible, only a few spots out of that top 12. Then in 2018, he had a really bad year. He was the quarterback 20. People kind of got a sour taste in their mouth with Matt Stafford. People thought maybe, is this the end of him? Matt Patricia, people don't really love him as a coach. I've heard just a lot of players even playing for him don't really love him as a coach. And so since he's been there, they haven't been able to create a ton on offense. However, then last year rolled around, and at the time, Matt Stafford was kind of people were off of him. But in those first weeks 1 through 9, the first 8 games this season, he had a bye week in there. He was actually the quarterback 6 in points per game over the stretch that he played. Then he got injured. His points per game rate actually finished the season as the quarterback 4. That is very, very good production. That is showing us what old Matthew Stafford was from before that season where he was the quarterback 20. And so that's what gets me really excited because we've seen Matt Stafford be the quarterback 1 plenty of times in fantasy football. Not the quarterback 1, but a quarterback 1 in fantasy football, plenty. They switched their offensive coordinators after his QB 20 season. They had a new one come in last year with that new OC. Matthew Stafford was slinging the ball a bit more, and you can see his production was way up. And so this season, I don't think he's going to keep the pace he had last year because his pace was pretty ridiculous. He was on pace for 40 touchdowns almost. However, I do think he's going to have a very solid season, and as a result, you're also going to see I have a lot of love for Kenny Golladay as we get there. So Matthew Stafford, I think he's a guy you can be targeting later in your drafts who's going to be giving you very, very solid production. We'll jump into the receivers actually now because that kind of ties in. So with that said, Kenny Golladay, he's developing a lot as a player. He's becoming a stronger route runner while already being a physical specimen who can go up and get the ball, pluck the ball over cornerbacks. He's a jump ball specialist, but also, and he is a target in the red zone. And so last year he had 11 receiving touchdowns. It's really hard for me to predict or project someone to get double-digit touchdowns because it does skew their projections a bit, and touchdowns aren't a stat that are predictable, really. They're a bit random from year to year. However, given how this offense is set up, given who the targets are in the red zone, given the connection between Stafford and Golladay, I'm still very comfortable giving him 9 touchdowns. I think his target share goes up slightly, and I think with Matthew Stafford, like his connection with Stafford, that Stafford's a lot better of a quarterback than David Blau, and so I really like Kenny Golladay for this upcoming season. I think he can be solid, especially in standard leagues, but even in a full PPR, he can be a wide receiver 1 for this year. I'm all in on Kenny G. The other positions on the team, Marvin Jones continues to be just a fantasy value because every year he plays well, but he gets hurt and he misses some games. And so, yes, maybe he'll get hurt again. Um, but when he's out there on the field for you, he's going to be giving you decent production. You can throw him in there as a flex play, and you can get solid production from Marvin Jones. And so, again, a guy that I think you'll be able to scoop him maybe in like the 8th round of your draft, and he can be a value there for you. Danny Amendola, probably not a guy you need to target in fantasy. In PPR, maybe he has a little bit of production, but likely not a guy you're going to be needing in redraft. And beyond that, not much to talk about for redraft. At the tight end position, another receiving threat on this team is TJ Hawkinson. I see him getting a jump or a bump up in targets. He's a great prospect still. I think last year people kind of got off him, but he was injured. He still is somewhat healing from that injury, and I don't think he's going to have the breakout season that some people are talking about. Really thinking people thinking he can jump into that like top 5, top 6 of fantasy football tight ends. But I do think he can be in the top 12 for sure. And although that's not amazing production, it's solid production that you can use on a week in, week out basis, because I simply just think he will get a good amount of targets. And with those, he's a talented player who can produce decent fantasy points. So let's jump back up to the running backs. Kerryon Johnson and DeAndre Swift. These are the 2 guys that you need to know in this backfield. And the question really is, how are these guys going to split it throughout the year? Right now, in camp, Kerryon, at first, there was some suspicion that he was injured because he was wearing a knee brace. Turns out that was actually just a precaution, that Kerryon felt more comfortable wearing the knee brace than not wearing the knee brace. And so he wears it to play. And I think as a fantasy owner, I think I actually like that because he's had a serious injury history. And so having him wear the knee brace, make it more secure, having him feel more secure, I think that's good for a player. If he doesn't believe that it's hindering him at all and it's making him feel better on the field, I'm a fan. I'm in on that, and I like it. So no injury risk there. However, not no injury risk, but no current injury for him. However, there is a current injury for DeAndre Swift. And so DeAndre Swift was apparently rocking it at camp, and then he's got this leg injury now that is costing him precious time to really try to gain a large role in the offense. And so come week 1, potentially Swift will have to sit out. For now, I have him started to play and then therefore be playing the rest of the season. However, we'll have to keep that monitored because there's a chance he misses week 1. But no matter how fast he comes back, if he is out there in week 1, the starter is going to be Kerryon. He's the veteran. He knows the system. DeAndre Swift has missed valuable time in those really towards the end of training camp is when you go through the really valuable scrimmages and walkthroughs where that's real game prep instead of just kind of like the easing people into it and learning the playbook and kind of the beginnings of training camp. And so although DeAndre Swift looked good there, the last few weeks are really key and crucial to earning that role. And so I think Kerryon is going to be the guy that we're going to see get a fairly decent market share from day 1. I think as the season goes on, DeAndre Swift is the better back. I think DeAndre Swift runs better than Kerryon, and I think he receives better than Kerryon, although I think Kerryon is a decent fantasy, or not a decent, but a decent NFL running back, and he can do both things. I think DeAndre is just better in both facets of the game. And so the way I've started it out is kind of with the idea that Kerryon will be the guy to own early on, but as the season goes on, kind of like Taylor and Mack, where it's just going to be DeAndre Swift will chip away and get more and more of a role until at some point he kind of overthrows Kerryon and becomes the guy getting at least more of the receptions work and an even split of the rushing attempts is how I see it. And so this is how it turns out. I'm higher on Swift for the year. But if you are drafting Swift, unfortunately, with redraft, the problem is then you're not going to get the production from him from day 1, I don't think, which sucks. And Kerryon can be a value probably for you. If you're going to draft, if you're going to not draft Swift, but you need to get a running back later in the draft, Kerryon will be available later in your draft. You can pick him up, and I think he'll give you solid enough production to put in a pinch as your RB3. And so when one of your RB1 or 2s is out for a bye week or something, you can toss him in there and get okay production from. So that's my redraft look at the Lions. So as a result, I am higher on Kerryon, which shows here. Yes, I think part of the reason his ECR is lower is because he doesn't have as much upside. But I'd argue that he does have a lot of upside. He's always been super talented. We've always liked his talent. And so people are scared of Swift. However, I think his upside is, well, Swift's out right now. And so Kerryon will still be solid at the start of that season. And immediately, we've seen this before. A player has value or has a good week one, their value spikes. And so whether you hold on to him and just get somewhat solid production throughout the year, or you trade him for something else, he will have a bit more value than the running back 37, in my opinion. The wide receivers, Kenny G, big fan. I already talked about that. So I'm higher on Kenny G than generally the consensus is. Marvin Jones, pretty fairly priced, as I've said before, but a guy who you can get later in your drafts as a value. And Danny Amendola, I'm higher on him because I think you'll get more production out of him, but that's just because my projections are higher than ECR. Doesn't have a lot of upside, so I don't mind you just leaving him on the board. TJ Hawkinson as well, like I said, fairly priced. He's going to give you decent targets. I think he could get into the top 12, but he won't. I don't foresee the breakout this season for the Hawk. Potentially in year 3, though, that's the year to be buying. In the Dynasty Outlook section, we've got Matt Stafford locked up for a long term. As we've talked about already, Matt Stafford has been a very good quarterback plenty in his career. He had one bad year that kind of left that sour taste. I think he's still a decent buy. I think you can get him pretty cheap right now in your dynasty leagues. And I think he's a guy that's going to be able to produce for you for a few years. He's 32. He's not old. We talk about old like quarterbacks, and I think Matt Stafford, people see him as old because he's in his 30s. But as a quarterback, that's still like he's got 4 years left on the deal, and I fully expect him to play on at least 3 of those years because his final year is only $3 million. So they could kind of get out of that. But those first 3 years, I think he's going to play. And a guy that I think, in Dynasty, I think you can only really plan for about 3 years. You can't plan 5 years in advance. I mean, running backs at that point, like it'll be a completely new regime in 5 years of running backs. So, yeah, for 3 years, Matt Stafford, he's a solid dynasty guy to pick up at a value right now. Swift is the guy to own in the long term. I love him as a talent. If you want to check out my rookie previews of him, those are on my channel already. I have him in that first video where I break down rookies because I have him, I believe, at RB4 and player number 4 overall in terms of rookies. Big fan of him as a player. Not the best situation, but a guy who I think can still be very productive for a while in fantasy football. Kerryon Johnson, he's going to be there for 2 years. That somewhat hinders DeAndre Swift, but I do think DeAndre Swift will take over the role here, and Kerryon will just kind of be the complementary back. Scarborough and Huntley, not too much to talk about there. Huntley could be a late dart throw because he's got some receiving ability, but I think he's actually more of a special teamer that they picked up. At the receiver position, something to note, Quintez Cephas, a rookie prospect that I like a lot. Jeff Okuda even said in college he was the best receiver, the hardest receiver to cover when he matched up against him. He's the only player really on contract for a long term. Geronimo Allison, he did opt out, so now he has next year as well. But Geronimo Allison also has never played for this team. Now he's opted out for the season. So Cephas, I think he'll jump Allison pretty quickly because he's playing this year and he's just getting familiar with the system. And then in front of him, there's a chance that, yes, Kenny Galladay will likely get a extension, and it'll probably happen before the season starts, or at least that's what they're talking about, trying to get him signed before the year starts this year. But there's a chance Marvin Jones or Danny Amendola walk, and Quintez Cephas could step up as high as the wide receiver 2 in this offense across from Kenny Galladay, kind of taking over the Marvin Jones role as soon as next year. So he is a dynasty buy for me, a guy that I would be targeting in your drafts, targeting in your leagues if you can go trade for him at the start of the season. That's kind of when the value starts to shift. People really want those players who are going to give them weekly value. And if you can throw in a guy who's just like an older flex play type of player, and you could probably, if you threw that in, you could probably get Quintez Cephas plus something else. Like you could throw Marvin Jones in, and I'm sure for Marvin Jones, you could go Quintez Cephas plus. And that's something that unless you're a win now team, Marvin Jones probably isn't moving the needle for you. And so Quintez Cephas is a good long-term buy for Dynasty. The Hawk, I like him. He's a very good talent. Don't give up on him. Hold him in your Dynasty leagues. I think mid-season, there's been tons of hype, and I don't know if he'll meet that hype. If he doesn't meet the hype, please don't give up on him. He's super talented. He's fighting an injury right now, and we've seen this plenty. Tight ends who just take to year 3, and he's got that 5th-year option, so he'll still have 3 years under contract if they decide to keep him. So stay with him. The Green Bay Packers. Okay, let me just take a breath here because I felt like I was talking really fast for the Lions there. All right, the Packers for this year. The questionable decisions of the offseason. They decide not to draft a receiver. I'm sure Aaron Rodgers was not happy about that. However, it's even more, or what pisses him off even more probably is that instead of drafting a receiver, they draft his replacement in the long term, Jordan Love, and they go out and get running back AJ Dillon. To me, it's just and they draft multiple fullbacks, and so Matt LaFleur, he's coming over from Tennessee. It just appears like this guy wants to just run the ball. He doesn't want his quarterback throwing it a ton. Matt LaFleur wants to ground and pound. He wants to get the ball on the ground, and he's going to continue to just run it. And so AJ Dillon looks like Derrick Henry. He's not nearly as talented as Derrick Henry, at least from what he showed in college. I don't believe he's anywhere near Derrick Henry. However, because of what he looks like in underwear, um, people seem to think that he could be the next coming or the second coming. And so, Matt LaFleur wanted to go get that piece because he's had Derrick Henry before. But how this kind of shakes out for this season, what I see happening, I think the total pass attempts come down for the Packers. Slowly will just continue to decrease. They're going to take the ball out of Aaron Rodgers' hands and put it in the hands of their running backs. I think they're going to continue to use somewhat of a committee, but like this season at least, Aaron Jones, he's a superb talent. And so kind of let's see how that shakes out. Aaron Rodgers, what it means for Rodgers, I'm slightly off of him, but it seems like the community as a whole is kind of off of him. I will say that he's not someone I see as a value at his draft price right now. And so I would probably just avoid at the moment on Aaron Rodgers. At the running back position, like I said, it'll be committee style. However, Aaron Jones is so talented. He's so efficient with the touches he gets. He can catch the ball. He can run the ball. I think because they didn't bring in any real targets, yes, Alan Lazard might take a step up. Yes, Marquez Valdes-Scantling might take a step up. But I also think Aaron Jones then will continue to get a good chunk of the target share because Aaron Rodgers, plain and simple, trusts him as a player on the field. And they didn't draft anyone to kind of replace those touches or those targets. And so I think Aaron Jones is actually going to be a very strong fantasy asset again this season. He's going to have to be efficient with his touches. He will not score 19 touchdowns again. I can almost guarantee that for you. However, he is, like I said, very good with in terms of like yards per carry and the efficiency when he has the ball in his hands. And so I do think he is going to be able to create touchdowns. And although that won't be 19, I still have him statted for 9 rushing touchdowns and 3 receiving touchdowns, which is very reasonable. And with those numbers paired with the stats that I've projected him out for in terms of his attempts, his rushing attempts, as well as his receiving work, I think he's going to be a solid back for fantasy, who I think likely you can get him after guys like Austin Eckler and Josh Jacobs and Miles Sanders and those guys. However, I think he'll give you just as good production, if not slightly better production than those. I mean, he was the running back 2 last year. Just keep that in mind. And I know we don't want to look at just, what have they done in the past? Because, CMC, he had like over 400 fantasy points last year. You don't just get those by drafting him. However, it is important to note when a guy produces, generally speaking, when you're trying to find guys who are going to produce in the future, guys who have produced in the past are pretty good at producing in the future as well. A.J. Dillon and Jamal Williams, I think they're going to probably rotate behind him. I think it'll start with Jamal. Jamal is also a bit of a better receiver, so he'll get a bit more receiving work. And then A.J. Dillon will start to get more rushing work as the year goes on, and neither one's really a guy you need to own unless Aaron Jones goes down. At the receiver position, I love me some Davante Adams this year. I think there is a chance if I had to pick someone who wasn't Michael Thomas to finish as the wide receiver 1 this year, it would be Davante Adams. Like I said, they didn't draft anyone. They've got no one. And on pace last year, Davante Adams was still a top 5 receiver. So I think there's kind of a sour taste in people's mouths like, oh, he really didn't perform for me last year. Well, okay, he got hurt and then he was recovering from injury. And so as a result, it doesn't look the greatest because I believe he was like wide receiver like 20-something on the season. And people say, he didn't perform. But he was great on a per game basis. And he's going to continue to be an elite route runner, the guy that Aaron Rodgers is going to continue to feed the ball. He's going to get see tons of targets. I love Davante Adams as the locked and loaded wide receiver 2 for fantasy football. Alan Lazard and Marquez Valdes-Scantling, if you're taking a shot, take it on Lazard. Reports out of camp are that he is the guy right now who is winning that job. He looked pretty good in spurts last year. However, Lazard I like him as an upside pick, you probably don't need to draft him until your very last or your second last round. But a guy that I think is very interesting, and I would be targeting him at the very end as a guy who, take a dart throw, see what happens in week 1. See how many targets Aaron Rodgers throws his way. There's a chance that he feeds him. I mean, Aaron Rodgers has supported multiple receivers before. It just hasn't happened recently. But if Lazard really steps up and becomes the guy who gets 70% of the snaps, 80% of the snaps, he'll get a good target share. The tight ends, Jay Sternberger, okay, reports are Robert Tonyan might start. I think that's garbage. Maybe Robert Tonyan is a better blocker, and as Matt LaFleur likes to run the ball, they might go into 12 personnel. And so they'll want Tonyan on the field as the second tight end, and maybe that's how he becomes a starter if they're switching to 12 personnel. But Jay Sternberger is the more talented player. He's the more talented receiver. If they need guys to catch the ball from Aaron Rodgers, simply put. And so Jay Sternberger is a guy who, although I don't think you'll need to draft him, he's a guy who I want you to know the name, monitor him, see how many targets he's getting, because he has the talent. And if he gets the work, there's a chance he becomes fantasy valuable. So keep an eye on him on your waiver wire. No one will likely draft him, but a guy to be monitoring and watching. So how does this shake out? You probably could have guessed it. I'm fairly average on Aaron Rodgers, but I'm higher on Aaron Jones. Love me some Aaron Jones still this year. And I'm higher on Allen Lazard, the two guys that I like as values from the Packers. Otherwise, everyone's pretty fairly priced. And I guess I also love Davante Adams, just that everyone else is, I think, agreeing with me that he is going to be the number 2 guy. So what does this look like for Dynasty? The quarterback situation, unfortunately, I can't see the future. I can't tell you how many years it'll be until Aaron Rodgers is done. What I can say is he has the potential out after 2 seasons. It's a lot of money. It is a lot of money to pay. However, if they are switching to Jordan Love at that point, Jordan Love is also a cheap quarterback. And so, you're paying money. However, if your quarterback starter is then $3 million, essentially you're paying that potential out of $17 million and you're paying Jordan Love $3 million. Your quarterback is worth $20 million, which is still half the price that Aaron Rodgers cost the team. So there's a chance he gets bought out and Love starts then. However, still 2 years at least for Rodgers. And for now, I'm probably not really trying to buy either of these guys. Aaron Rodgers, I'm not really buying him for Dynasty. And Jordan Love, I would taxi squad him maybe, but if you haven't already drafted him, I wouldn't be actively trying to trade for him unless you're going to be able to throw him on your taxi squad and you can get him for super cheap. The running backs, I don't love A.J. Dillon. I think he's going slightly too high or being valued too high right now. I know there's people right now asking, even in some of my leagues, they want a first-round pick for A.J. Dillon, a 2021 first. Hold your picks. This guy's not that talented. I know LaFleur might want to run the ball a lot. I just don't think he's that good. And so I think there's a realistic chance even Jamal Williams could just beat him out. And so, unfortunately, that's how, unfortunately, yes, if you have him, you're going to want a good price for him. And if you want him, you're going to have to pay too much. But I would say right now, Aaron Jones is the guy to own this year. There's a chance he re-signs. If he re-signs, I don't think A.J. Dillon has a chance to beat him out in terms of talent. Aaron Jones is much more talented than A.J. Dillon. If Aaron Jones is gone, A.J. Dillon might have a crack at the starter job, but please don't be paying your first-round picks for him. Maybe that bites me in the butt, but I'm happy to be wrong on a guy who I just don't believe in when I watch the tape. At the receiver position, Davante Adams will continue to be a star, whether it's Aaron Rodgers or Jordan Love coming in after that. Davante Adams is the guy right now. He's an elite route runner. He's amazing off the line. I would say he's probably the best in the league off of the line, and one of the top 10 route runners. So I love Davante Adams as a player, a guy that, you could probably get a move I made this offseason. I'll just tell you guys that because I'm comfortable making this move. Sell high on Michael Thomas. It's very rare that we see a wide receiver be the wide receiver 1 multiple years in a row. So right now, his price is at the highest it's going to be. He was setting records. He had a record-setting season. It is not very likely. It's very, very slim likelihood that he repeats that. And so if you can sell him and get Davante Adams plus something else that helps your team out, I would do that move. Allen Lazard, decent pickup, but he's an RFA after the year. He's got no guaranteed money, so you can buy him, but I would only be buying him if you're getting him very cheap. The other guys aren't really special, and Sternberger, a tight end that I like, lots of talent, and if you can get him cheap, he is a guy I would be holding for Dynasty leagues. So the last team, the Minnesota Vikings. With the Minnesota Vikings this year, they're going to be a run-heavy team, I think. Gary Kubiak was the guy who came in last year. You'll probably hear this a lot when people talk about Cleveland, but Kevin Stefanski, he wanted to run the ball. Well, he ran the ball a bit, but the big change last year was Gary Kubiak came in, and Kubes is a run-heavy guy through and through, and he was the offensive advisor, I believe was his role. Now he steps into the offensive coordinator role. I think it's going to be a very similar look offense to last season. However, I think they're going to run the ball even more. Why? Because they lose Stephon Diggs. And so they have Dalvin Cook. They have Alexander Mattison. Why not use those guys? Kirk Cousins is a talented quarterback, and he's efficient when he has the ball in his hands. He's a very accurate quarterback. And I think he's a talented NFL player, despite being a little bit inconsistent game to game. But I don't think Kirk Cousins is going to end up being a great fantasy asset this year, simply because I think they're going to run the ball. And so Kirk, not a guy I'm super interested in. But at the running back position, I love Dalvin Cook. I think right now you're going to get that discounted price because there is fear about his money situation. And yeah, I don't necessarily think he's coming back next year. However, if they're going to run the ball that much, I don't think you're going to see Dalvin Cook get like 200 carries and Alexander Mattison get 180. Like, I've got them statted out for 474 rush attempts. They had 476 last season. Out of those 470, I think it's safe to say Cook gets at least 225. But I definitely see him, as long as he's healthy, getting more. And so, yes, there is an injury risk. And yes, there is that contract risk that people are allowing him to become a value, in my opinion. But I would still be confident enough to draft him. He gets very good rushing attempts. He gets very good targets from Kirk Cousins. There's no one to pass the ball to. We've seen this before. When vacated targets leave a team, the running backs get those targets. And so, I mean, Dalvin Cook, I think he's going to be very solid. And you can scoop up Madison. I definitely think if you own Cook, it's a very wise decision, and it's very much worth the draft selection to go get Alexander Mattison in your draft. But I believe in Cook, and I still have him as a top 5 back for this year. I believe I have him at 5. But we'll see that when we get there. The receiver position. Well, there's one really, really big name here, and that's Adam Thielen. When we look at Adam Thielen was a top 12 wide receiver in both 2017 and 2018. I don't know if you remember, but he became a stud in those years, and that's with Stephon Diggs on the team. Then last year, he got hurt, and people thought, he's actually not that good. He didn't look that good. He wasn't producing very good for you, and he probably burned some fantasy owners. However, before his injury, weeks 1 through 6 games. I know the sample size isn't huge. When you're looking at a season, that's a decent enough sample size to pull some results. He was the wide receiver 9 in PPR leagues, that is. That's still great production. That's a wide receiver 1 production. And right now, you're looking at what they look like for this season. So 2017 and 18, he was wide receiver 1. The first 6 games, he's looking like a wide receiver 1. He gets hurt. He tries to play through the injury, and he doesn't look so great. This year, though, projecting him for 16 games right now because he's healthy. I think there's no reason otherwise to project otherwise, And there's no one else. Stephon Diggs is gone. Justin Jefferson is in. I love Justin Jefferson as a prospect. I think he's a very safe prospect. Don't know how high his ceiling is. I don't think it's an elite ceiling, but I think his floor is, he's got some good talent, and so he's going to at least produce to some extent in the NFL. However, that's not happening this season. Out of camp, it doesn't sound like he's really shining or really doing that, like pulling an A.J. Brown and becoming that alpha right away, and that's okay. That's fine with a rookie. Olabisi Johnson is the guy that's actually holding that job over him, but you can't tell me that whether it's Jefferson or BC Johnson on the field, Kirk Cousins is going to want to look off of Thielen to go to them. He's going to try to get the ball to Thielen. Yes, the coverage will be tough, but Adam Thielen is a very, very talented wide receiver who has proven that many seasons in a row. I think at his draft price, if you're getting him in the 3rd or 4th round, I'm very comfortable with him being my wide receiver 1 on my fantasy football team this year. And so if you can get him after you stack 2 running backs, or if you can get him in the 4th round and you've stacked 2 running backs and gotten someone else at receiver, like a Kenny Galladay if he slips to the 3rd, or Allen Robinson in the 3rd, I'm very comfortable then taking Thielen. And in fact, Thielen's almost as good as A-Rob to me this season, which in fact, I think I actually might have him ahead, which we'll see in a second. Jefferson and Olabisi Johnson, guys I'd leave on the wire and redraft. Some interest in Dynasty, which we'll talk about, but that's about it for that. And then at the tight end position, Irv Smith Jr. is a very interesting player. I think he has a lot of talent. And like I said, because there's we don't know who that second receiving target's going to be. I said those targets might go to the running back position. Something to keep note of is that Irv Smith, I believe in camp, they've been lining him up out wide. I think there's a chance then during the season we see some Irv Smith opposite Adam Thielen, and potentially Rudolph could even be on the field at the same time. And so something to keep in mind, because Irv Smith is a very talented player. He looked good when he was on the field last year. He's a developing young tight end. He's only 22 years old right now. So for this season, your very last pick, maybe, but I would probably leave him on the wire, but definitely a guy I want to keep my eyes on, because if he looks good in that first game or so, or if he looks like he's going to get 6 or 7 targets a game, that's going to be a very good potential with him, because he's got a lot of talent once he gets the ball. He's got a lot of talent if he's on the field. If he's on the field, he's going to get targets, and then he's going to get you fantasy points. So I am interested in him, probably leaving him on the wire for now, but a guy to keep your eye on. So how does that shake out? Dalvin Cook is my RB5. Okay. That's good. That's kind of where I was seeing him. Alexander Mattison, if you're going to draft Cook, draft Mattison. Otherwise, probably don't need to go with Mattison. I would still expect Cook to get the role no matter how the contract situation is. So expect that the Cook owner will draft Mattison before you need to be going and getting him if you don't have him. Cousins is fairly priced. Looks like, okay, yeah. So Thielen and Robinson, I have them right around each other in terms of most leagues. So depending on your league, it'll kind of vary. But 2 guys I like. If you could stack those 2 after some running backs, I think your team is in really good shape. Jefferson and BC Johnson, just leave them out there. I'm lower on Jefferson than the consensus. I'm much higher on BC. That's because BC was a very talented rookie last year. People don't seem to recognize that when he was on the field, he actually looked good, and he was only a rookie. And so this year in the offseason, the reason he's ahead of Justin Jefferson isn't because Justin Jefferson is a bad player, but BC is actually playing well in camp, and that's what the reports are. And so BC is an interesting guy to keep an eye on in dynasty leagues. If you can get him for super, super cheap, he might even be on your waiver wire. He's worthwhile scooping up just to see what he can do. And then at the tight end position, Irv Smith and Rudolph, both guys I'm leaving on the wire for now, but I'd be watching for Irv Smith because he has a lot of upside. So what does the dynasty outlook look like? You got Kirk Cousins locked up for a few years, a nice, efficient quarterback, but a guy that I don't think you're going to want to own tons of as long as Gary Kubiak is the OC, just because Kubes likes to run the ball. The running back position, I think there's a very, very high probability right now, based on what it sounds like, that Dalvin Cook will be a free agent. And so as much as I like him in redraft, it is a bit risky because the Vikings are a great team to be on as a running back. They will run the ball. They will give you the ball. They'll throw to you out of the backfield, and he's getting that workhorse role. We can't guarantee that, if someone else, another team says, yeah, let's go pay him, but, he has this injury history, or we don't run the ball as much, and so his value will go down. I think Cook is a talented player when he's on the field. However, I think if he signs somewhere that's not Minnesota, it's more likely, like the average team, if he signs with the average team, that his value drops to about the RB8, RB9, RB10 in Dynasty. And so that's just something to keep in mind if you're a Dalvin Cook owner. I wouldn't sell him yet. I might wait to see how the first few games go, because in the middle of the season, people stop thinking about what's their contract like, how many years am I going to get out of them, and they start thinking about, okay, he's going to help me this year. He's a beast, and they'll be willing to pay you a really high price for him. Mattison, own him if you have Cook, because he's one of the guys, just like how I talked about Benny Snell, could be the starting running back for his team next year. And this offense is one that, like I said, the reason why Cook drops in value is because he's leaving this offense. Mattison would be immediately an RB2 if he's the starter, at worst, with a chance to become a low-end RB1. I'm that serious about that. Make sure you own Mattison as a Dalvin Cook owner. And if you want in Dynasty, I'm not against trying to go scoop up Mattison for cheap, just to hold for the season. At the receiver position, Thielen ain't going nowhere. At least that's how I see it right now. Justin Jefferson might be there, but I think Thielen's talented on the outside and interior, so he can play the slot, but he can also move outside to allow Jefferson to run out of the slot a bit more. So I think Thielen is going to be a solid guy for at least a few more years. He's got the skill set to eventually move inside again and be a good receiver into his mid-30s, like up to 33, 34. Those bigger body guys, they kind of get shut down. But Thielen, he's got the technical side of it that could keep him going as he's a bit older. So I'm still okay with him in Dynasty. Justin Jefferson, a prospect that I think you might have to be patient with. don't think he's going to produce a ton this year personally. But I think he's a guy who, he's got the 5th-year option. They've committed to him. He's a first-round pick. They're going to give him every opportunity to be successful. And I do think he will become successful as the two learning from Adam Thielen. But BC Johnson, a guy to stash in your dynasty leagues. And Irv Smith, a guy I'm actively buying. I'm actively trying to buy. Unfortunately, I'm not having a lot of success. But Irv Smith, a talented tight end who he looked very good in his small spurts last year. I think he just supplants Kyle Rudolph as soon as this season. I know it sucks that Kyle Rudolph he's got all that money locked up for a few years, and he'll be there vulturing touchdowns, which will be frustrating. But Irv Smith, I think, has a lot of upside as a tight end prospect. And he's very young. He's very young. Sometimes we see these prospects come out of the draft and they're already 22, 23, 24 when they're drafted. But Irv Smith is only 22 now, entering his 2nd season, and he's going to have a role. And so I'm a fan of him for Dynasty. So that's the video. There's the NFC North preview for the season as well as some Dynasty outlook. Here is how my rankings shake out. If you're curious to see where any of these guys stand in comparison, or kind of the range that you need to be looking at them, I believe these are in my half PPR rankings, and the quarterbacks are in 6-point passing touchdowns. So that'll be all. Thank you for stopping in. We're going to try to jump through the rest of the NFC over the next week. I'm going to try to crank those out for you. If you have any questions, it's draft season. So if you have any draft questions, make sure to reach out to me on Twitter at Sawyer_FF. I would gladly answer any of your questions. You can also drop a comment below, and I'd love to interact with you. Thank you again for checking out the channel. Please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next or later in the week.